Irish Nation, we are back for our second season preview episode. We're recording these in a marathon. We've got one down. Go check out the show that we just recorded on transfer portal activity for Notre Dame. This is going to be our deep dive on the offense. Mike, welcome back. Episode 2 of the fourth season here at Irish Talk.
Yeah, great to be back. We talked about this a little bit in our first episode, but we have upgraded all our technology and capabilities. We're recording these on back-to-back marathons. We just finished the first episode, so hopefully that one is not a total disaster and the audio is not corrupted. But regardless, we're just chugging along now. Since this is one of the first couple episodes that we're doing, we wanted to give a reminder about our show, what our approach is, what our aim is. Our existing listeners, they all know this, but for anyone new, we figured it'd be helpful just to kind of get that context. So Brett and I, we really lean into the analytics. We're not football coaches. We're not going to be able to, we can dive in a little bit, but we're not hardcore X's and O's guys who are going to be able to tell you all the ins and outs of a scheme. We do this a little bit, but really our bread and butter is looking at advanced stats, look at advanced analytics and what that's implying, in terms of takeaways for a game, what are takeaways for the season, what to expect moving forward. And then I think another element for us is, so we're alums of Notre Dame. We love the university. We love the team. We understand that these players are student athletes. And granted, now some of them are making quite a bit of money, but I don't think that really changes our perspective. They're still young kids who are really focused on, trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to really develop and put the effort in. So we don't really feel like it's our place to, come in with hot takes, be overly critical of some of these players. We try to have a half glass full kind of approach. We try to be really positive, and that carries not only into our discussions about the team and the players, but also interactions that we would have with fans, whether it's Notre Dame fans, opposing fans. We're not English Premier League hooligans. We're not going to games looking to get in a fight. That's not our MO. We're looking to kind of make this be as enjoyable an experience as possible. But at the same time, Britt and I are human. Like we'll get emotional, we'll get upset about certain things that happen in a game. And I will say, but what we try to do is maybe Brett and I could be texting each other stuff that's maybe a little more heated. But we try to, as it comes to the podcast or any interactions publicly, we try to keep it, we try to keep it like very positive, and we try to keep everything, we're not trying to tear anyone down by any means whenever we do this podcast.
Certainly my alter ego as a college student watching football games has moderated significantly now as the current version hosting this show with you. Like we've certainly evolved over the last decade plus that we've known each other, but definitely try to approach Notre Dame as football should give us a lot of fun. Football should be an opportunity to hang out with friends, hang out with family, go see cool places, whether that's back on campus at Notre Dame or new places on the road. And we try to approach the podcast the same way. I am admittedly terrified, Mike, about what's happened in the last hour. So we've now recorded our first show with video. So someone has to be staring at my mug for 30 minutes, but we also haven't edited it yet. So we have no clue what's going on in the background. So be ready. I've recently learned to not call things failure, call them learning moments. We might be in the middle of a massive learning moment, folks. So hang in with us, but this is our attempt number 2 now at recording a video show. So Mike, ready to dive into the offense?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's also dawning on me, we used to always be able to edit out my allergic coughing that always happens. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and August, September is terrible, and I cough all the way through it. I've now realized that's a little harder on video than it was.
Yeah,
you could just
you're going to have to manage. Yeah, after I think anytime you go to a game and your voice is just completely shot. So one, your voice is always completely shot, but then 2, you always cough a lot. So I don't know. You're gonna have to just be downing Ricolas whenever you're at a tailgate. I think moving forward.
Can we get the Hall's Defense cough drops as a sponsor on the show and just have them send me, a bunch of podcasts, a bunch of cough drops to get through the podcast? Not a sponsor, could be Hall's Defense. Yeah. If you're out there, give us a shout out. So the offense, we're going to start with last year. Gaudy numbers, easy strength of schedule. How should that translate into this year? And I think it's important because new offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock replaces Jared Parker. Jared Parker, I think, drew the ire of this show, and certainly I think Notre Dame football fans more broadly. Sam Hartman, that flowing hair, that gregarious smile and personality. I'm personally going to miss him. I know a lot of our female fans of the show out there, including my wife Ann, is very much going to miss Sam Hartman on the sidelines. Potential upgrade with Riley Leonard, but so much moving around, and I think it gets lost in the shuffle that last year Notre Dame set a record for points scored, 39 points a game. And I get we're in an offensive era of college football, and points just in general are way up, but that was seventh best in the country at 39 points per game. Notre Dame hasn't ranked seventh best in the country in offensive scoring since 1992. I mean, we were in diapers the last time that Notre Dame was top 10 in the country in points per game, 14th in SP plus. That's the efficiency metrics we spend so much time talking about this show on, play-by-play data. How good is your team? Number 14 was the best we've had since 2020. We've only finished in the top 15 in SP plus 5 times since the Lou Holtz era. So by and large, that was a pretty good offense by Jared Parker, despite really getting negative backlash from the fans, from the media. He goes and takes the head coaching job at Troy. I think everyone kind of viewed that as like Jared Parker threw Notre Dame a lifeline, because I think we were going to bring him back. I don't think we're in a position to fire him. And I think it was just going to be really another tough slog. And we go out and make Mike Denbrock the highest paid offensive coordinator in the country, bring him back to South Bend. And I think for Notre Dame fans, that felt good, taking Brian Kelly's offensive coordinator from LSU, coaches up a Heisman, gets Brian Kelly kind of back into the conversation of a potential program to contend, and then burns him to go back to Notre Dame. That felt good. There's no way about it. So we've got this huge, like Denbrock's the big upgrade. Jared Parker, thank God he's not coaching us again. But we had this really great offense. Like, by all accounts, it was this really great offense. So, Mike, we've identified two things. I'll maybe let you start on the first one. I'll take the second one. But we've identified the tale of two cities against competition. Against mid and low level competition, we looked awesome. And against good defenses, we looked not awesome. And then why was that? I think we and just about anyone watching this team knows, but we can put some numbers behind it to give context, the ability to make adjustments. So we want to start there. And the reason we're starting with a look back to last year is to set the context for what, one, we should be watching for this year, and two, why do we believe that might be different with Mike Denbrock and Riley Leonard in a way it wasn't with Jared Parker and Sam Hartman?
Yeah, so I'll start with that look back. And I think you hit everything there perfectly. By all accounts, from just a pure statistical advanced metric standpoint, this was a good offense. So I think if you're looking to have a positive takeaway, you could definitely argue that the foundation of a really good offense existed there. But where they fell short was against these top defenses. So I'm just bear with me here. I'm about to rattle off some of our performances against the better defenses that we played last year. I'll start with Ohio State, who's number 2 per SP plus. So that SP plus predicted that we should score 22 points in that game. And we only scored 14. We obviously lost that game. But if we had even just performed how we were expected to from an offensive standpoint, we would have won that game. Moving next to Clemson, number 21. So they predicted that we should score 27. This one wasn't quite as big a deal, but we scored 23. So again, another weak performance from the offense here. It's like we face another good defense, and our offense doesn't quite live up to the task that they were expected to do. And then Duke's another one, not quite at the level of Ohio State, or and a little bit below Clemson, but still a top 25 defense per SP plus. So it predicts that we should score 28, and we scored 21 again. So you're seeing a theme here. Anytime we're facing these good defenses, our offense is just kind of stumbling. Same thing with with Louisville. Again, top 35, and we fell short again. We fell short of our projections of what our offense was supposed to do in that game. So we're not here to say that we're necessarily we would have won these games if the offense had showed up. In some cases, it looks like we might have, but it's showing that when we actually hit a challenge, for some reason, and for reasons that we'll get into in a minute, our offense seemed to fall short. And these advanced stats that show that our offense was actually really good, we really were juicing these stats against weaker competition. So it's like when we played a team with a pulse basically on defense, we lost our wits. Like we weren't able to continually move the ball downfield. We seemed to struggle. We turned the ball over. But then if we were playing a team that was near the back half of the country in terms of defense, it seems like we excelled even more so. We played so well that it overcame these bad performances against good teams and made our stats actually look pretty good. So very frustrating because I think when you look at that, as I hinted at the beginning, it tells you that there existed, I think, the potential for the offense to be very good. And the fact that you fall short against good teams, but are extremely efficient and effective against bad teams, to me, that seems to fall on the coaching. It tells you that the talent is there. It tells you that the team has been able to put it together at times, the performance that you need, but just not against the good teams. And that falls squarely on the offensive coordinator. And the good thing, Brett, is we don't have to stress out about our offensive coordinator this year. The issues that we were worried about last year hopefully have been resolved with Mike Denbrock.
100%. And I think it's important to put a finer point on this too, where I think a lot of times fans are like, oh, like we scored 39 points a game, but like, how do you only score 14 against Ohio State? Well, we're not saying you have to score 39 points a game against Ohio State. You just can't score 14. Like the model says, go score 35 against USC, go score 42 against Navy, but you got to at least score 21, 22. You got to at least get into the 20s against Ohio State. You got to at least get into the, high 20s against the Duke or a high 20s against the Clemson. And I agree. It just points to coaching when against bad competition, against the 7 easiest defenses on the schedule, we outperform the prediction model in every single game. Against USC, model predicts we should score 35 points. We go and put up 48. Okay, like congrats for beating up on a really bad USC defense that wound up firing their coordinator. It's in those other games, you have to find ways to obviously not go score 40 points against an Ohio State, but go give your defense a chance to win that game. We look at adjustments for that. We pulled out a few games. I think the NC State game is a really interesting case study where NC State cut that game 24-17 with 2 minutes left in the third quarter. So I think a lot of people step back and remember us blowing out NC State. We wound up putting up 45 points in that game. But it was 24-17 late in the third quarter. And what happens next? We have a strip sack fumble, 3 and out, interception, turnover on downs from our defense. That's what our defense does. Our offense sputtered down that stretch. And sure, we scored from 33 yards out after an interception. We scored from 16 yards out after an interception. And then we scored from midfield after a turnover on downs. But other than those 3, the defense kept giving us the ball back, and it was punt, punt, punt. Another example was the Duke game. We went up 13-0. The defense gets the ball back. So we now have a 2-score lead. Our defense gives us the football, and we go 3 and out. Next drive, 1 first down, punt, 3 and out. And then Sam Hartman comes back with the heroics to survive the game. Game on the line, and we wind up with 3 straight punts when we have a chance to put the opponent away. And maybe the worst one of all those was Clemson. We scored 23 points in that game, but we also had a 2-yard drive after a near pick 6 by the defense. And in the second half, we cut the lead to 31-23, and our defense forces a punt. So we now have momentum. We get the ball back in a high leverage situation. And I was in person, and what I just saw, like, it might as well have been Brian Ferentz coaching Iowa football, trying to get to 25 points a game to keep his job. I mean, it was pathetic, where on the next 5 possessions, we go 3 and out, 1 first down punt, 3 and out, 1 first down interception, turnover on downs. Like, it was just, like, ridiculous how little ingenuity there was where, okay, you got to the third quarter, the other team made adjustments. What do you got in your bag? And we consistently, wait, what do you mean we can't go with our game plan? What do you mean we couldn't go with our script? What do you mean they're doing something I didn't expect them to do? And the moment we had to go off schedule And consistently, the scenarios we're talking about is in third and fourth quarters. Consistently, we're talking about that point in the game where it wasn't the fast start, it wasn't the film prep, it was the okay, they adjusted, they figured out what we're trying to do on offense, and the defense is throwing us a different look. And in those third and fourth quarters, we just stunk against top competition. That's why we're excited about Mike Denbrock.
Absolutely. So I think for me, there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about Mike Denbrock. I think you got to start with his performance last year at LSU against the top defenses that they played. So again, here I'm going to tick through some of their performances. And again, he didn't nail. I wouldn't say he was perfect in every single game, but by and large, you're seeing them show up against good teams. So in Alabama, LSU, Alabama, always a big game. Maybe Alabama wasn't at the peak of their powers last year, but they scored 28 points, which is a little bit low. Their SP plus prediction of 30 points for that game, so a little bit lower. But I think 28 points against Alabama, generally, that's something that you're going to be okay with. I think where you start seeing a little bit more performance here is Ole Miss. So Ole Miss, that's their number 22 defense in the country. So a top 25 defense essentially here. And LSU put up 49 points. And it was an absolute offensive highlight reel performance. I think again, this was like one of the stronger performances of the year for LSU. So these are the types of performances that that get you excited about with Mike Denbrock. And then Missouri, I think this is another great data point here. So Missouri last year was one of the best defenses in the country, number 14 in SP plus, so a top 15 defense. And SP plus predicted LSU should score 31. They put up 49. So that was a pretty exceptional overperformance. And again, Denbrock's not perfect. So against Florida State, where they lost, they scored 24. They were supposed to score 30. So an underperformance there. But by and large, we're at least seeing them show up in many cases, and not just show up, in some cases, really exceeding expectations here. Uh, LSU, I think at a quick glance, you would have thought that their offense would have been probably significantly higher than Notre Dame's in terms of SP plus. We pointed out like Notre Dame was 14, LSU was 11. So really not that different, but the difference here really is that they showed up against the best defenses in the country. So I think if you're looking at Notre Dame and you're trying to criticize the performance last year as we did, and you're attributing it to falling short due to coaching decisions, the fact that Denbrock is doing well against good defenses, against defenses that have strong defensive coordinators, have a lot of talent, or doing interesting things with scheme, I think that gives you a lot of confidence in Denbrock's ability to really put his players in a position to excel. So I think that's Brett. For me, that's what I get most excited about. But there are a lot of other really, really positive aspects about this hire, that we've talked about before. So yeah, Brett, do you want to go into a little bit about some of these other characteristics that make him such a good match, an
Yeah,
intriguing fit at Notre Dame?
absolutely. I'll maybe do it in one of two ways. I'm going to start with just a proven talent developer. So Jaden Daniels, obviously a 5-star recruit at Arizona State, doesn't really work out there. He's trending towards a bust. He goes over to LSU, well documented, spends 2 years with Mike Denbrock and turns into a Heisman Trophy winner. Pretty impressive run. At Cincinnati, everyone remembers what Mike Denbrock eventually turned that Cincinnati offense into with Luke Fickell. And of course, they make the college football playoff. They beat Notre Dame that year. He coaches up Desmond Ridder, who's now, trending towards an NFL bust, but like coached up a, very low touted kind of 3-star recruit for Cincinnati and turned him into a first round NFL draft pick. Pretty impressive. And that Cincy team he took over stunk. The year before he arrived, they ranked number 98 in SP plus. They ranked number 101 in his first season. So it wasn't like day one improvement, but they went number 74, number 64, number 24, number 13 by his final season there. Just a demonstrated ability to level up with that Cincinnati program. And he's really familiar with Notre Dame. One of the things I often remember, he was the wide receiver coach that produced Mike Floyd. If that doesn't get Notre Dame football fans excited about what we are doing, going through in our wide receiver room, and I get Floyd was a 5-star pick. I get like anyone could have, coached Mike Floyd and he still would have been a great college wide receiver. But I think that's a big time hire for Notre Dame coming back. He was the OC or associate head coach in the kind of 2014 era with Everett Golson, 15 and 16 that saw us produce Deshaun Kaiser. Will Fuller in that stretch. So, I mean, this is a guy that's been around some pretty successful Notre Dame offenses. I also want to go on a rant for a second. Pete Sampson covered something in his mailbag. He takes in questions from listeners. We love Pete Sampson on the show. Writer for The Athletic. If you're not aware of what The Athletic is, go to theathletic.com, get a subscription, follow Pete Sampson. And the question was basically, are we going to get rid of the Kelly era zone blocking scheme and go back to some smash mouth running? First of all, we just hired Mike Denbrock, the most Kelly of all Kelly guys. Like Denbrock has followed Kelly his entire career. So no. Two, the zone blocking scheme that we've talked a lot about on this show is just modern college football and NFL running schemes. Like that is smash mouth football. Sharon Moore has an entire YouTube video he created as like an assistant coach some time ago that he like sells to other high school coaches as the like Sharon Moore zone blocking scheme. And while I hate Michigan, it sure as hell won them a national title. And I just want to be clear, the zone blocking scheme that in the last decade has produced running backs, Audric Estime, Kyron Williams, Josh Adams, Dexter Williams, Tony Jones Jr. You mean the zone blocking scheme that has produced Joe Alt, Quentin Nelson, the Martin brothers, Mike McGlinchey, Sam Mustipher, Aaron Banks, Eichenberg, Hainsey, Jared Patterson, and Ronnie Stanley? We have like 10 guys blocking in the NFL, and that's up there with any program in the country. So this nonsense of like, are we finally going to move on from Brian Kelly football? It was pretty darn good in the run game. Like that was not the problem with Notre Dame football, was like our run scheme. And so I'm actually taking a different path. Thank God Mike Denbrock is back. And if we do nothing else other than keep producing like 1,200 yard rushers, 1,300 yard rushers, first, second, third round draft picks on the offensive line, call me so excited. Like Mike Denbrock is coming to bring some good old fashioned Midwest roots and go back and attack the run game first. And so I'm not saying that disappeared with Jared Parker. Like by all means, Audric Estime had a phenomenal season for us last year. And I think that was the area our offensive line did really well and frankly carried the low points of our wide receiver room. But I go back and say Mike Denbrock has been able to succeed at both. Regardless if he has a Jaden Daniels Heisman quarterback QB, can he run a more electric, high-power air raid offense? Or at Notre Dame or Cincinnati, is it going to be a run first, use the talent that's there, coach up the offensive line and win in the trenches? I'm very excited about the balance that Mike Denbrock brings to the offense.
Yeah, he checks every single box for me. We talked about the first point, strong performance against top defenses. Something that's very difficult to do. Checks that box. Experience with Notre Dame, a lot of experience with Notre Dame. Gets the university, proven developer. We mentioned Jaden Daniels, Heisman Trophy. Michael Floyd. This is a guy who continually makes the players that are playing for him, he makes them develop into much better players than maybe they would otherwise. And then, I think, like you said, it's like at every step in his career, he's improved whatever offense that he's at. So it's not even just, it's not surprising. You have great development of players, that's going to couple with the fact that the offense will probably improve as well. Well, you're seeing both to a pretty strong degree. So for me, and then you mentioned we poached him from LSU. So I don't know that was on my checklist necessarily,
but it feels
that's good. It's a pretty good bonus, right? I just wish if there was a video that existed of Brian Kelly's reaction when he found that out. I feel, if you could just somehow, if you could pay some of money to have that get leaked somewhere, I feel like there's some Notre Dame fans who could they could probably pull together more money for that than than some of these NIL contracts that we're doing. And we're actually doing pretty well in NIL. So I think that just tells you how much people would want to see that and hear that tape. So,
I bet there's a lot of Notre Dame football fans out there hopes that Mike Denbrock did that at 4 a.m. in like a one-sentence text and said, "Sorry, I'm gone. I really miss you," and then left in the middle of the night. I hope
maybe
that's
just
how
ghost
it
him. Maybe just block. I doubt he would do it because by all accounts, Mike Denbrock's a pretty classy guy.
Just block him.
But just block him. He's like, Kelly's like, "What's going on here?" Denbrock's not
getting back to me.
I'm getting green text. What's going on here? I know he has an iPhone. Yeah, so I'm really excited. And Brett, that was a pretty good rant. Honestly, that was one of your more hopeful rants.
All right.
I also, is that the first rant? Is that your first video rant?
Ooh, I think that first ever video rant. It's got to be. I'm not on video. This is the first time I've ever posted to YouTube.
Yeah, we gotta develop our video editing skills. I think when you're on one of these rants, if we could just add some sort of like
I gotta
red
get
sort
like
of spring.
more fired
Yeah,
up. Okay, I'll work on that.
yeah,
I'll work
we
on
could
the
have like
visual expressions.
Mordor in the background. That could be. I think that could be a good option. But yeah, I think yeah, like I said, Brett, I'm with you on the zone blocking scheme too. I think it just doesn't make any sense to pivot away from that. It's served us very well. And then, as I mentioned, I think Denbrock is one of the key reasons to be very optimistic about this year.
Absolutely. So let's keep going through the depth chart. So we've spent now our time on last year, spent time on why we're so excited about Mike Denbrock coordinating this system. I'm going to quickly fly through the depth chart. And then, Mike, maybe you can take us through a couple different of the themes and topics here that we've been talking about throughout the offseason. So Riley Leonard, obvious big name, coming in at quarterback, transfer from Duke. Last time we had a transfer from the ACC was Sam Hartman. Worked out okay last year, I think, hoping for more out of Riley Leonard. Running back room, Audric Estime off to the NFL, the Denver Broncos, I believe. Turns over the stable of horses to Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price. Wide receiver room, we covered that in our last episode. Go check that out on transfers. Bunch of guys out the door, but coming back and expected to lead that room, Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse, the two Jadens, Jordan Faison, Mitch Evans at tight end. They're going to be supplemented and potentially surpassed by transfers coming in. Chris Mitchell, 1,100-yard receiver a year ago at FIU, and Bo Collins, call it 2-3 year starter at Clemson, using up his final year of eligibility in a golden helmet. Maybe a couple other guys to shout out: Cooper Flanagan, Eli Raridan, looking to knock on the door for playing time at tight end. Offensive line, pretty much a full refresh, and arguably the biggest question mark in terms of understanding who's going to be starting where. Joe Alt, Blake Fisher off to the NFL. Zeke Correll moves on. He was starting to get passed up by Ashton Craig. And then I think the big concern, Charles Jugasaw was the presumptive, highly touted recruit, sophomore, played at the end of the season when Alt and Fisher were struggling with some injuries and looked amazing. He tore his pectoral muscle in the, I think, second or third practice of summer camp,
Yep.
gone for the season. So what that leaves us with, Ashton Craig at center, Billy Schrouth at right guard, Emil Wagner at right tackle. Left guard, seems uncertain battle going on. Sam Pendleton maybe currently having the edge over Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler. True freshman Anthony Knapp has been running with the ones at left tackle. Potentially
Anthony.
Anthony. Potentially Tosh Baker, the kind of floating utility lineman we've used the last few years. So bunch of moving pieces, couple starting jobs here still not locked down. Wow. That's a lot of movement from a year ago. If you go back and look at last year's opening day roster, only Jaden Thomas and Mitchell Evans are still there. If you look at where we were at the end of last season, definitely more guys in the mix that we're seeing playing time, but a ton of turnover in the last 365 days.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going on here. It's just a ton of change on offense, and that always will give you some pause, some area of concern. But that's the reality that we live in nowadays in the modern college football landscape. This is just a fact of life, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your offense isn't going to be able to have an effective year. It's just that there's a little bit more uncertainty. But I think in the case of our offense this year, I think there's more reason for optimism due to what we've gained through some of this change. So if I'm looking at what we lost last year, some of the key players are Sam Hartman. Obviously, we're going to miss that hair. We've mentioned that a few times already. Chris Tyree and Rico Flores. I think Rico Flores probably hurts the most, maybe out of those. But then the portal was really good to us. So then we gain Riley Leonard, Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins, and I think these are generally upgrades. I think that puts our offense in a good position moving forward. So again, we're going to have to see it. We don't know that for sure. But at least on paper, this seems like there's an opportunity for improvement, particularly with the receivers, and certainly a possibility at quarterback for us to take a step forward. So I think, yeah, a lot of change, but change isn't always a bad thing. And I think in this case, it could actually be a very good thing. Now, moving forward, so we're as we've mentioned many times, we're a glass half full podcast. Kick it over to you, and you tell me what you're feeling the best about right now.
it's got to be quarterback. As much as we loved Sam Hartman on this show, I think it's important to remind folks he was an undrafted free agent. I think we're in the second or third game of the preseason, and he's already not getting playing time in preseason games for the Washington Commanders. He was drafted by the Birmingham Stallions for what it's worth in the UFL, so maybe he goes and plays some UFL football. My personal favorite, though, would be to have him back on the sidelines as the sideline reporter, halftime show. Still get to stare at that hair. Have I talked about his hair too much? Maybe not talking about Sam Hartman's looks a little too much on this show. I also just realized this is why I can't do video. I took my wedding ring off to go to a swimming pool earlier today. So I'm now also talking about Sam Hartman nonstop on the show without a
Something to tell
wedding
us, Brett?
ring for my first time on YouTube video. So yeah, not going, I promise. Ann and I are doing great. Love Ann. Love you, babe. Life's good. But I should probably be a little more careful about that. Anyways, see, we could edit this out if we were doing audio. Now
No
everyone on
chance.
YouTube, no chance. Now everyone on YouTube is going to know all about this. No editing takes anymore. Or if there is, we need to figure out that functionality. So, okay, back on track. Riley Leonard, big time X factor for sure. Highest ranked QB in the transfer portal. All the skills and size to be an NFL caliber QB. And we said that about last year. Like we thought Sam Hartman was a great college quarterback with pretty limited upside at the next level. The sky's the limit for Riley Leonard. That might mean more volatility in there. That might mean, Sam Hartman maybe more of the surefire play. And you see that in Riley Leonard's career. He was injured a lot last year. He played for Duke. That was not exactly a lot of talent around him. And I think by and large struggled last year. He was hurt. He only played in 7 games a year ago. In those 7 games, he only threw for 3 touchdowns. Only rushed for 170 yards. He's had 2 ankle surgeries since then. So there's real question marks on stability and health. But you go back to where he was 2 years ago, 20 touchdowns. I think he ran for, I've got it somewhere in our notes, but ran for another chunk, accounted for over 30 touchdowns, I believe, rushed for 700 yards, had a 64% completion rate. That dropped off a year ago, too. And that was without really a real deep wide receiver room or skill around him at Duke. And he's going to have, despite all of our question marks by Notre Dame standards, our wide receiver room would run circles around where Duke's was a year ago. Certainly our run game would run circles around where Duke was a year ago. And I think something we've missed the last couple of years is that dual threat quarterback, even if he's not run first, even if we do everything we can to make him a pocket passer within this system, a guy that has the potential to run for 700 yards can make an offensive line look so much better buying time in the pocket, scrambling, evading rushers, getting outside the pocket to extend plays in a way we just didn't see with Sam Hartman a year ago. In a way we definitely didn't see with Jack Cohn, who we talked about as maybe one of the least mobile quarterbacks ever at Notre Dame. And so I think Riley Leonard, with the dual mobility alone, in a year where the offensive line has uncertainty, in a year where wide receivers have uncertainty, I just can't think of a better fit going into that QB room as a reason to believe that a guy who put up, I just looked this up 2 years ago, 37 touchdowns. So I think he ran for, I'll have to go double check this, ran for 17, threw for 20, a guy that put up 37 touchdowns 2 years ago with Notre Dame's talent around him. Ton of uncertainty in that group around him, but talk about like, this could be a top 5 offense. That's not a crazy thing to say. I think in almost any of the prior versions of previewing a Notre Dame offense, we would have said, oh man, do you think we can be a top 25 offense? This year, I think we need to be asking the question, there's a real shot to be a top 5 offense. There's a reason the wheels could come off and we don't hit that expectation, but this could be a top 5, top 10 offense.
Definitely. It's more boom and bust, but I think one big difference, which you hinted at, between Hartman and Riley Leonard is someone who can create on his own. He can, if other players are not bringing it on a certain day, he's someone who can elevate the entire offense by himself. I think someone like Sam Hartman, a key element with him is that he could be a really effective quarterback, but he really needs the supporting cast around him. He needs receivers who are going to be able to run really effective routes. He needs an offensive line that's really going to be able to help him out. With Riley Leonard, he can help mitigate a lot of that. And I think that's a key element here. And then I think with the QB room more broadly, so we're talking about the ceiling here with someone like Riley Leonard, and that's a really high ceiling. It does the possibility of a top five offense is I'm not saying it's probable or likely, but it's a realistic scenario that could happen. Um, I think, but when you look at the QB room as a whole, one other element here is that the floor is also really high too because we have quite a bit of depth. If you look at the quarterbacks behind Riley Leonard, we have Steve Angeli, who we know, maybe he's not a first round pick, but he's someone who can come in and can play well. We've seen that from him. That's something that we know. And then CJ Carr, who is the potentially the next big star at quarterback. We'll see. These things, you never can fully anticipate how things are going to shake out in the future with quarterbacks. But by all accounts,
but by the way, highest ranked recruit we've had at QB since Jimmy Clausen, just to put things in perspective. So this isn't like, oh man, do you think Brandon Wimbush or Phil Dracovic are going to pop? Like CJ Carr, real deal from a recruiting profile.
for sure. And I don't want to put too much focus on the spring game because that's a common mistake that you can make. But he looked good in that spring game, and I think by all accounts, from the reports that I've read from the beat reporters and people who are covering Notre Dame, he really is ahead of schedule, and he looks as advertised. I would not be surprised, to see him end up being one of the best quarterbacks we've had in a long time. But that guy, it's like right now I don't even know if he's QB3 at this point. He might be QB4. So the guy that obviously could change by the end of the year, but we have a lot of depth. I haven't even mentioned Kenny Minchie. So this is a group that, I mean, honestly, it could feasibly withstand two injuries at quarterback, and we still, I think it's becoming a little dicier in that scenario, but you could feasibly still be okay, and that's not a situation that I think most teams find themselves in, especially now in the transfer portal era.
Absolutely. I mean, you go back to when Tyler Buckner went down a couple of years ago in Marcus Freeman's first year, and it's kind of like, gosh, like who's next? And it was a mess. Like Drew Pine came in, did his best, but we then saw Drew Pine go to Arizona State and kind of flunk out of college football in a way. Um, right now, you also feel good about Riley Leonard, where you don't need to sit as a Notre Dame football fan. You don't need to sit and say, "Ooh, he needs to be careful because if he gets hurt, we're done." That's not the case. Like Riley Leonard's got to go grip and rip it. I also just looked up, corrected the stat. It wasn't 37 touchdowns 2 years ago. It's 31, 20 through the air, 11 on the ground. So let's move on to two concerns. I think if we look at offense or defense, the two biggest concerns are both on offense. That's offensive line and the wide receiver room. I think, Mike, you've been a little closer to our offensive line and who's shuffling around. So let me maybe go first and cover the wide receivers. Go back and check out our last episode on the transfer portal. We also covered the wide receiver room in pretty good detail. So I'll do it maybe a quicker version here and let you cover the O-line. It's all about who's getting the ball from Riley Leonard. And I think there's 6 number 2 wide receivers or number 3 wide receivers and not a bona fide number 1. There's not a guy at wide receiver right now where I'm like, that guy is going to be Miles Boykin and go for 1,000 yards. That guy's going to be Chase Claypool and go for 1,000 yards. That guy's going to be Will Fuller, and gosh darn it, he might be pushing All-American. We don't have that right now. So we have Jane Thomas, who arguably was better 2 years ago than he was a year ago, was dealing with a hamstring all of last year. Jane Greathouse, highly touted, 4-star recruit, really popped last year at moments, but then would just kind of disappear for games at a time. Almost reminded me of Deion Colsey from a few years ago, who, by the way, still hasn't popped. Deion Colsey, now on that list, he was dealing with injuries a year ago. He's healthy. Jordan Faison, the walk-on lacrosse player turned amazing slot receiver against Louisville, and everyone's like, how come he can't be in the game more? And we're like, well, he's only been playing football with Notre Dame for 6 weeks and doesn't know the rest of the playbook. So hopefully Jordan Faison knows more of the playbook. That's a guy that can really pop out of the slot. We've talked about the transfers in Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell. I was so hoping that the only thing the Notre Dame offensive coaches were talking about in August was Chris Mitchell. Like, I was so hoping the hype was like, y'all, this guy is for real out of FIU. And I'm not hearing that as much. Now, I get it in practice. He's got to go up against Benjamin Morrison every day. Like, okay, good luck for anybody. But it makes me a little nervous, the transition from group of 5 to power 5. Never a sure thing. And so I get a little nervous. How will that translate? Maybe they're just being coy. But when I hear all of that, the wide receiver room is now on its, 3rd coach in 3 or 4 years. with Mike Brown coming in. Um, Maybe Cam Williams, true freshman, maybe he pops, but the track record of true freshman at wide receiver for Notre Dame is pretty, like, just hasn't happened. So my overall concern about this offense is Riley Leonard could be amazing, but it's Sam Hartman 2.0. Like, just guys aren't getting open. I mean, I still think back to last year, and I think if you look at what held back Sam Hartman from what he did at Wake Forest, he was a better quarterback at Wake Forest because his play caller ran play action, and Sam Hartman is very great at reading play action in that mesh scheme at Wake Forest, and Jared Parker just wouldn't call it for him. He also wasn't as good because guys just didn't get open. And if guys aren't open, like, it's just really hard to be a college quarterback. Like, that's just kind of the reality of the game. And so my concern is we've got a version 2.0 of that with a bunch of guys that are solid, but not bona fide number ones. And most importantly, depth is a real issue. I just rattled off 6 wide receivers. And other than Cam Williams, the true freshman, there's just no one behind him. And so if you have even 1 or 2 injuries in the wide receiver room and 1 or 2 guys don't really step up and translate and like kind of turn into productive receivers, won't be a problem in September. But that could be a big reason why this team fades in November, of just not figuring out dudes to step up out wide.
Yeah, I mean, this position group was our biggest issue last year. I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that they should be improved. I think they will be improved, but improvement from bad to below average is still not good enough. And we don't know exactly where this room's going to shake out at. I'm with you, Brett. I wish with Chris Mitchell that we would be hearing this guy's a stud. He's clearly established himself as the number one receiver. And I think if I was hearing that, I would feel really good about this room. I think right now there's a little bit of uncertainty. I think from what I've heard, from what I've read, it sounds like he's doing good. But again, we're kind of getting that through the lens of like what the coaching staff wants us to hear. So I think that adds some uncertainty. And you mentioned maybe they're being coy. Maybe this is a tactical maneuver. Maybe they want to shock some of the teams that we play. The media, they are getting some peeks at practice though. So it's not like they're not getting any information. So we'll see. I think it'll be improved, but it's not hard to improve from last year. So I don't know that that's the bar that we need to set for this. But that being said, I'm going to move to our next position group of concern. And this is, I think, if you were to take a poll of position groups of concern for our fan base, I think this one might be number one, actually. And that's the offensive line. So anytime you lose someone like Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, guys who went in the first and second round of the NFL draft, that's a big loss. Those are really good players, really effective players on the line. And the question becomes, how can you replace them? And I think right now there's a lot of uncertainty that we're going to be able to actually properly, address this turnover that we have on the line and be able to put together a strong unit. So, for instance, the guy who was supposed to replace it, Charles Jagasaw, who Brett you had mentioned was looking like the next great offensive tackle at Notre Dame. Unfortunately, he's out for the season. So that caused a big reshuffling of what we were thinking on the offensive line. Absolutely brutal. Brutal for Charles, brutal for the offensive line this year. And again, it adds a lot of doubt about what we're going to be able to do. Now, I think if you're looking for reasons to have some optimism, and this is kind of I would say this is a bit of a weird perspective in terms of like a reason for optimism, but our offensive line last year, as good as you might think it would have been based on the players that we had, and the players that we had go at the top of the NFL draft, it actually, looking back, it was not quite as strong a performer as you may think. It took a little time for the room to gel, and I think particularly in our run blocking in particular never really got up to the level that we were hoping. So last year we were 71st in the country in rushing yards before contact. That's not good. That's frankly below average. And we got production out of the running game, but honestly, a lot of that was just Estime was such an effective running back. He was able to make plays out of nothing. Maybe not at the level of someone like Kyron Williams, but at a really effective level. So I think someone like Estime kind of bailed out the offensive line a little bit there, made them look a little bit better than you may initially think. They were good at pass protection. That was one area that they were good at. But overall, this was not, by no means was the top offensive line in the country last year. This was, I don't know, it was like especially in terms of Notre Dame standards, I would say this was one of the more average offensive lines that we had seen. And So I think it's if you're looking at that, that would maybe give you some hope that you can build from that. And then we also had our third offensive line coach in 3 years. So finally, this year we have some continuity with Joe Rudolph. This will be the second year. So I think if you're looking at that, I think that gives you maybe some optimism that things can gel a little bit better. Maybe we don't have the high end talent right now that we had last year, but maybe as a unit they can figure it out a little bit better. But kind of on that point on high end talent, there's really not Brett, and I want to hear your thoughts on this too. But to me, I don't see an obvious first round pick. I think Charles Jagusah, I think he would have been someone who certainly could have been pegged as that. But Tosh Baker is someone who was a highly touted recruit, but has never really quite lived up to that potential. It looks like he might be getting passed by a true freshman, Anthony Knapp. Ashton Craig, he's effective at center. He passed up Zeke Correll, but not a highly touted recruit either. Pat Coogan's another one who's fighting for a spot, 3-star recruit. Pendleton, another person who's fighting for a spot on the line. He's a little bit more highly touted, 4-star. Spindler's the one guy who's very highly touted, top 60. And it seems like he's someone who may be living up to that billing, although I don't know that I would put him as a first round pick at this point. So I don't know. I'm not looking at this and I'm not seeing a dominant Notre Dame offensive line. In fact, I'm seeing a lot of young inexperience, and that makes me really nervous, especially early on in the season, especially when we're playing really good defensive lines like the ones that we're going to see at Texas A&M. It just makes me, again, there's some of these reasons I have for optimism overall that we may be able to put together a unit that could be better than expected. But I think the lack of the high end talent, I think it is valid to have concern about this. I think it's valid to worry that we may get exposed at times against strong defensive lines.
Do you believe that the guys right now, if the day started tomorrow, you're thinking it's Emil Wagner, Billy Schrauth, Ashton Craig, Sam Pendleton, and then Anthony Knapp? Is that your O line like tomorrow?
You
If
don't want to
from what
like
you're hearing,
you don't want to overreact to practice reports, but there were some tweets that came out that they basically said that Knapp and
that's
Pendleton had
starting
been
the
running
five.
they've been running with the ones for a couple of days. And again, maybe they're just testing it out. But if you're testing it out at this point in camp, there's definitely a possibility that could happen.
Yeah.
So look, and I think it's like you have a true freshman, you have I think Pendleton's a sophomore, and then the rest of the guys,
Yep.
they're redshirt sophomores or true juniors, however you want to classify them. So yeah, I mean, I think someone like Billy Schrauth or Emil Wagner. These are guys who are pretty highly touted. I don't know that they don't strike me as first round guys yet. I mean, we'll have to see. But there's just not that that it factor. There's not that strong conviction that we've had in prior years. Like I don't. You're not going to have Quentin Nelsons and Mike
Yeah.
McGlinchey's every year. But I wouldn't say that I'm the confidence that we used to have in the offensive line to just be that steady unit that could just bully teams over, and we knew that they were always going to do their job. I don't know. Like I don't know that we're going to have that this year. Again, as I mentioned, there's some reasons for some hope, but I think it is a position group of concern for a lot of legitimate reasons.
It's interesting that Notre Dame's production at offensive line translated into the NFL has taken different shapes. Like Ronnie Stanley, Mike McGlinchey, Blake Fisher, they were always going to be studs. Quentin Nelson, like they were always highly touted guys. But we've put a lot of other guys out there, the Robert Haineses, Jarrett Pattersons. Joe Alt is a great example of guys that were not highly touted recruits. And I actually like hearing that a guy, like Pendleton, who's a 4-star, like at right guard, Billy Schrauth are stepping into those starting roles because those are the highly touted guys. It always concerns me when, man, it kind of feels like this is a race to the bottom if the developmental 3-star is beating out the 4-star. But Billy Schrauth gives me a lot of excitement. That was a big recruiting win out of Wisconsin. We were down to Wisconsin or Notre Dame. That was a big recruit for us to go and get. So I'm feeling a little better about that. If we're saying Emil Wagner, another top 150 recruit. But I agree, it's just so new, right? It's so like, man, how's this going to gel? And we're missing a guy in Audric Estimate. Maybe this is a good transition to running back. He led the country in yards after contact at nearly 4 yards a carry. That's just insane. 1,300 yards, 18 touchdowns. Now, what gets me excited is Jadarian Price actually had more yards after contact, and Jeremiah Love wasn't far behind. So those two guys in more limited reps also looked very estimate like, different builds, different dynamic, probably more agile and less of a Jerome Bettis bruiser. But I think that depth at the running back room and some real proven, like, I get it, they were behind Audric Estime. I get it, they didn't run for 1,300 yards, but they got a lot of looks as the number 2 and number 3 running backs and did a lot with it. So if you told me more mobile quarterback than Riley Leonard and two really good running backs pacing an overall really deep running back room, I think that's actually the biggest thing that makes me feel good about the offensive line. What makes me feel nervous is that Texas A&M game. What makes me feel nervous is a substantially entirely new offensive line, or guys kind of stepping up for their first time as full-time starters on the road at Kyle Allen Field to start the season. I don't know. Like, that's a reason for
Yep.
concern in that game.
Yeah.
Over the course of 12 games, I think we're in a really good spot. And it's important to know this is now the first time in the last 4 years where we'll have the same offensive line coach back-to-back years in Joe Rudolph, with obviously Harry Hiestand stepping in for 1 year, kind of sort of out of retirement, then back to retirement. And so I think the stability of Joe Rudolph, a lot of guys shuffling around, like, it's going to be a puzzle. I think it's going to be a little shaky in September. I feel like every year there's a story of like the offensive line gelling going into October. I think you're going to see that here, and I think it's really mitigated by Riley Leonard's legs and two running backs that Notre Dame should feel very solid in. Like, Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love are not developmental projects. They are legit 4-star studs that have gone from, living in Audric Estime's shadow. But ND has a great track record of next man up in that running back room, going from Dexter Williams and Kyron Williams and Tony Jones Jr. and Josh Adams. I mean, like, you can go down the line of, got it, now it's Audric Estime's turn. Boom, 1,300-yard rusher, 18 touchdowns, All-American type campaign. I think that's stacking up again with those two guys that feel like it's a really good mitigant to the offensive line coming together.
Yeah, great. Brett, I think that's a great point. I think, yeah, these concerns about the offensive line are legitimate. I do think by the end of the year, odds are this will be a pretty good line. I think it's just more early in the year if we're leaning on inexperience. But your point on us having elements of the offense that can totally mitigate it, that's key. That's not a, I would say, a luxury that we've always had. That it just tells you how important someone like Riley Leonard is, someone who's mobile, someone who's big. Why, like, having a strong running back group that can help the offensive line. It helped us last year when we weren't run blocking as effectively as we would have liked. So I think these are things that can kind of help us get past that. And then if the receivers end up living up to the improvement that we're hoping for, I think that puts you in a pretty good situation. And I have to say, I mean, someone like Anthony Knapp, so true freshman coming in, that if I had a guess, I would guess that he probably is going to end up being very good. That just doesn't. We have plenty of. I mean, even some of these guys who haven't lived up to expectations on the offensive line. If you have a true freshman who's getting to that level, even with injuries, odds are his trajectory is probably going to be pretty strong. This is the exact same situation with Joe Alt. Now, I'm going to say more times than not, you're probably not going to get a Joe Alt. You're probably not going to get someone who goes that early in the first round. But it is promising for that prospect's development if he's already making waves this early. It's just kind of the point that you made, Brett. It's early on in the season. Is this gonna sting us quite a bit before we've had a chance to gel? Is this going to take longer for them to kind of become a cohesive unit? I think, offensive line is a place that we've recruited well. We've brought in a lot of great prospects. Rudolph seems like a good offensive line coach. As we've mentioned a couple times already, this is the second year in the system. I think, like, the long-term trajectory is very positive. It's more just the concerns are, and this is a point we probably should have emphasized more. These concerns are more short to medium term, I think, on the offensive line.
Absolutely. And maybe I'll round it out with one more question. SP Plus has Notre Dame projected at number 10 overall offense in the country for their preseason ratings. And again, we led this off in our last show on the transfer portal. There's just so many stats for, like, okay, like, you're predicting we're number 10, but returning production, transfers in and out, guys to the NFL, like, guys that come up like Chris Mitchell from Power 5, guys that are out the door like Rico Flores, guys that are in like Riley Leonard, but he was hurt last year. So are you assuming the Riley Leonard of 2 years ago or the Riley Leonard of last year? Are you assuming, like, are you basing our offensive line on recruiting rankings, or are you basing our offensive line on just Notre Dame's track record. Like, there's so many ways to take that data, but Bill Connolly is one of the smartest guys out there, and he thinks Notre Dame, from a stats perspective, is going to be the 10th most efficient offense in the country. Mike, where do you shake out? Like, what do you think is the best Notre Dame can be? What do you think is, gosh, if things go wrong, how bad can it get? And just more generally, where do you got it? Do you think this is a top 5, top 10, or top 25 offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty with predictions nowadays, with all these elements that you mentioned. So, I think when someone like Connolly is working with all these data points to try to come together, he's kind of arriving. It's from my perspective at more of like an average of all these scenarios. So he has this as 10th. Like, is it likely that we're 10th? Not necessarily. It could be more likely that we're a little bit higher, a little bit lower. It's just that's kind of where we're landing. I think we mentioned before that with someone like Riley Leonard, that gives us a pretty high ceiling. I think the ceiling is really high with this team. I think when you have a quarterback who has the potential to be as effective as someone like Riley Leonard could, like a potential first round pick, that puts you in a good situation. So for me, the ceiling's top 5. I'm not going to say top 3. I think it's just the teams that are hitting those top 3 levels are, they're littered with first round picks at wide receiver. That's not something that we have. But if Riley Leonard's a big hit, I think a top 5 offense is on the table for sure. In terms of downside, we mentioned the good thing with the quarterback room is that we do actually have quite a bit of depth there. So the scenario where things completely go off the rails, it seems pretty unlikely. It's like worst case scenario, maybe you have someone like Kenny Minchin or CJ Carr. And I think and that's like a really extreme scenario. A realistic scenario where Leonard gets hurt and you have Angeli come in, that's very feasible. And I think in that scenario, we're okay. So a scenario where we, slide so far back that we're like the 50th offense in the country just because of that doesn't seem very likely to me. I think like the worst case scenario would probably be like I don't know, maybe like 35th or something like that on offense. And now I guess my final kind of arriving at where I think we will actually be, it'd be a total cop out if I just picked the total midpoint. I would say, I mentioned these concerns on the offensive line. They're legitimate. But as we also both mentioned, we have a lot of factors that can mitigate that. I think Denbrock's huge. I think his addition I think that could unlock something with our offense and our receivers that we haven't seen in a long time. And another point that I should have mentioned more is that Denbrock works really well with quarterbacks, like Leonard. You saw that with Jaden Daniels. You saw that at Cincinnati. So I think he's someone who will be able to get the most out of this. And I think he'll be able to, if there's someone who's going to be able to mitigate weaknesses, it is someone like Mike Denbrock. And so that leads me to be a little bit closer to the high end of the range than the bottom. So I don't know. I don't want to like totally match, SP plus, but I don't know. 10th actually seems to me, that seems like a pretty reasonable scenario to me.
I think one of my biggest concerns is the schedule overall very favorable. We'll get to that in a couple shows from now. But I think the schedule actually works against this offense. Texas A&M to open the year, then easy matchups against Northern Illinois, Purdue. Miami, Ohio, sneaky predicted to have a top 30 defense, followed by Louisville, expect to have a top 30 defense. Now I get both of those are home. And then really the only other tough defense we play all year is Florida State. So in terms of the opportunity to go and outperform against higher end defenses, at least from where people are projected to shake out here at the start of the season, it's really 3 of the first 5 games. And so if something takes a little bit of time to find that offensive line, if something takes a little bit of time for Riley Leonard to get his legs, or for the wide receiver room to sort out kind of who is the bona fide number one, 3 of our 5 toughest tests for the offense, not necessarily for the defense or the team as a whole, start the year. I would love if this team was a top 5 offense, and the reason to believe is there. Offense gels quickly. Sam Pendleton and Billy Schrouth and Emil Wagner, like those higher end recruits, actually turn into bona fide studs, and you're like, holy cow, we got the next Mike McGlinchey and Ronnie Stanley on our team. Okay. But if that doesn't happen, or if it's like, gosh, we just have 6 number 3 wide receivers and no Chase Claypool, Will Fuller, I think that's more likely to happen. And so I've got this as a top 25 offense. No reason we shouldn't be going out there and putting up a bunch of points, and Denbrock figures it out, making better in-game adjustments. I've got this, though, more like I think there's more downside to upside to say being a top 10 offense. I think we're squarely top 25. I think as we get into season predictions, foreshadow, I'm incredibly bullish, whereas last year I was a little more bearish. I told people to take the under on Notre Dame's win-loss, and I was spot on with 9-3. So I had it right last year. You're going to hear me be more bullish this year, but that's because of our defensive preview coming up on our next show. I'm a little more hesitant on where this offense shakes out. I think Riley Leonard has such incredible upside, offensive line, wide receiver room, like all of it can make sense. I just think, especially early on in the season, if it takes time to gel, might not be that top 5 offense, more because the toughest tests are early on. All right, that'll round out our show on the offensive side of the ball. We will be back to go cover the defense on our next episode. Garish.
Garish.